Hello, I'm Robert. This is to help you if you're scared of many things by fact checking. And this is about people who are scared that Biden's climate plan just can't do any climate legislation anymore. They seem to think that this Supreme Court ruling on EPA is something to do, is some way going to derail Biden's climate plans. But I haven't been able to find any specific examples that anyone has given of any of Biden's executive orders or his past legal decisions, the bipartisan bill, or any way that it could impact on the bill that they're trying to put through Congress right now. They hope maybe by the end of July to have a bill ready to go through Congress. So I can't find anyone who mentions anything to do with any of those. The decision was about the now repealed Obama Clean Power Act, and it doesn't seem to impact on these things. So I'll explain a bit more about this. So, and the other thing that I haven't found any stories yet that explain that a lot of people are saying, oh, this is the Supreme Court usurping powers they shouldn't have. They don't seem to realise that there's nothing unusual about this decision either. It's the 7th time that a Supreme Court has made a decision similar to this. So it's made based on the major decisions doctrine. That's the informal description of what they did. So the question that nobody in this particular case, it's not at all questioned that EPA can regulate CO2 emissions. The Supreme Court don't doubt that at all. They accept that. And for instance, for new power plants, EPA can regulate the CO2 emissions. That's in the Clean Air Act, that they can regulate acid rain, sulfur dioxide and things like that. And clearly, if acid rain counts as something that can harm people, then CO2 causing global warming can count. And so that's a gas that EPA can regulate by the Clean Air Act, and that's not questioned. So the Supreme Court decision is based on the major questions doctrine, which is whether it's because of the particular way that Obama's Clean Power Act was designed, in which they worked out, first of all, we want to have a certain percentage of coal-fired power stations left by a decade from now. In order to achieve that, we need to use a CO2 cap of such an amount across industry, and this will force lots of coal-fired power stations to close down. So that was how Obama administration wanted to use the Clean Air Act in their Clean Air Bill in their Clean Power Act in order to force coal-fired power stations to close down using EPA. And the Supreme Court said that there's nothing wrong with Congress doing that, but they don't see, so the justices are looking at the legal text and whether the texts and the laws and the background connected with the authority. So the way it works in theory is that Congress can set laws, and in that legislation it can delegate authority to the executive, including the president, so they can give powers to the president so that he can do things, decide on things by himself, and then they can give powers to various administrative bodies such as EPA, and give EPA the power to make certain decisions, usually under the direction of the president. And so the Congress has to explicitly delegate these powers to these various bodies and these various people. And so the Supreme Court looked at how the Clean Air Act delegates powers from Congress to EPA, and they said, well, they don't see that Congress has delegated to EPA the power to make such a major decision as to use the Clean Air Act to deliberately cause coal-fired power stations to close down by using a CO2 cap. And they did that based on the major decisions of doctrine. It's come up 7 times in total. This is the 7th time, 6 times before, that the various previous Supreme Courts, not this one, previous Supreme Courts have made similar decisions. So it's not something new. So why everyone is saying it's new, I'm not really sure. And unless they just haven't bothered to check the legal precedents. But it wasn't, it took a little bit of searching, but not that much, to try and find, have there been previous questions settled by the major questions doctrine. And it only took maybe a couple of minutes Google search to find a document which gave a long list of 6 previous Supreme Court cases based on major questions. So maybe unless they never thought to search for this, or they're not very good at Google searching or something, I don't see how you can miss that if you're doing a really thorough job of your article. And so I just chose one of them to look at. I thought, well, the FDA ruling on tobacco, that looks like a likely one to be supremely to be relevant, and it turned out to be a pretty good example. So in 1995, the FDA had lots of evidence by then that tobacco was very bad for children, that it was causing harm to children, and it's something that they wanted to be regulated so children couldn't start smoking early, or at least not to encourage them to smoke early. So the FDA then decided to regulate the commercial sales of tobacco, and with lots of rules. For instance, you couldn't have sales of tobacco within a certain distance from a school, and you couldn't have colourful packages for tobacco unless there were only adults visiting that premise. And lots of restrictions, about a dozen or so restrictions they put on the tobacco industry, some of them quite onerous, and it would have quite a lot of effect on adults wanting to buy tobacco as well, because they would no longer, they'd have to go to places where children don't visit in order to buy colourful packages of cigarettes, for instance. And so one of the tobacco companies brought a case, a legal case about that. They reached the Supreme Court by the year 2000, and the Supreme Court back then, they stopped the FDA from restricting sale of tobacco to children, and they didn't dispute any of the evidence that the FDA produced that it was harmful to children. It wasn't based on that. They said this is clearly an important thing that needs to be done. We understand you. They didn't say it quite like that. We understand your reasons why you have to do this. We're not questioning it. This is an important thing that needs to be decided, needs to be done. But we don't see how, in law, in the written text, how you have the authority to do that. We don't think Congress has delegated this authority to you. We think Congress has delegated enough authority so you could make minor decisions about tobacco. We don't think that Congress has delegated the level of authority so you can regulate the tobacco industry in such a way that as to cause very major impacts on business. And they use previous history, things the EPA itself had said previously, many years previously, that they didn't have the right to regulate on tobacco, so that didn't help in terms of the ability to do this. And then Congress had several times passed laws about packaging for tobacco, and the Supreme Court reasoned that Congress wouldn't have needed to do that if the legislators were of the opinion that FDA had the authority to do that. So they had past evidence to say that the FDA didn't have the authority to make major decisions about the sale of tobacco, specifically about tobacco, and so that's why they stopped the case. Purely legal reason, nothing to do with the rights or wrongs of it, nothing to do with the ethics. And so in 2007, Congress gave FDA the explicit authority to regulate sales of tobacco, and so now it does regulate sales of tobacco, and it's under the FDA because Congress gave the explicit authority. So this is a very similar case. The Supreme Court is saying that we don't see how Congress has given you explicit authority, has delegated enough authority for the EPA to use the carbon dioxide cap to force coal-fired power stations to go out of business. And we understand the reason is well explained as to why you're doing that, but we don't think that you've been delegated that authority. And so, if Biden wanted to do that, then he would then have to get a bill passed through Congress and the Senate, which he probably could do. No, he probably couldn't do because Manchin wouldn't agree with his way of doing it. But supposing Manchin did agree, then he would just need to add in that that EPA now has the permission to make major decisions that will affect the economy based on carbon dioxide caps. And then that would be it done, then EPA can do it. Or some legal version of what I just said. But Biden doesn't want to do it that way. That's why I'm saying it seems to be totally irrelevant to Biden. If he wanted to do it that way, he could just write it in. But he's not interested in that approach. So Biden is his own president. He's not Obama. And he doesn't want, now that he's president instead of vice president, he doesn't want to use Obama's Clean Power Act. He's got a different approach. He wants a much gentler landing for the coal industry. Still the same amount of CO2 reduction, but much more support for them as they go down to zero. So, and it's much more to do with the carrot and much less stick, especially because of Joe Manchin, who has strong investments in the coal industry. And he's saying, I know that we need to go to a future with no coal-fired power stations, but please give us a gentle landing economically, so we can do the transition more easily. And Biden is saying, yes, I agree. So that's Biden's approach. He's still talking about phasing out coal, but in a way that is kinder to the coal industry than this Clean Power Act. So he doesn't want to do it this way. So it's totally irrelevant as far as I can see. I just don't see the relevance to anything that Biden's doing. So there's been a great deal of fuss and hysteria, and as far as I can tell, it's about nothing, absolutely nothing. It has some, so some of the remarks by scholars, and I thought, well, this has meant, this whole major questions thing is something new, and it means that Supreme Court is now looking at things in a way it hasn't before. But then when I looked at this past history, I don't even see how that is relevant. I think they may be hyping it up a bit. Because you do get, they're people, they're ordinary people, they sometimes hype things up. And it's not, the journalists are attracted by scholars that say extreme things, because then they can write nice kind of dramatic stories. So you've got to bear in mind that it's not always a representative scholarly opinion from a legal scholar that you're going to see in a very rapidly written story by a journalist who has maybe not done a lot of research themselves, and they just rang up a few lawyers, and one of the legal experts said something very dramatic to them. So they said, this is what I need for my story. And that's basically how they might have ended up like that. And then they ignore the other ones that didn't say anything so dramatic. So it's not necessarily that they are representative, the legal opinions that you see in these journalistic articles. They can sometimes be quite extreme views. And they've just rang several lawyers until they found several legal experts until they found one that's saying something dramatic. That can happen in journalistic articles. And I don't know if that's what's happened here, but just looking kind of beneath the hood, it doesn't seem to be a very dramatic decision. I don't really see how the Supreme Court is doing anything much more significant than they did with the FDA in 2000. But whether or not it is in some way, in some legal sense, a bit more significant, it might be. But even if it does, it just means that Biden needs to be, I don't know, I'm not a legal expert, it might be there's some details of this that make it a little bit more significant than the way they ruled on FDA in some of the intricate legal details that mean that going on from now, the the presidents and Congress have to be a little bit more careful about delegating on major decisions and setting the powers that they delegate. But that's all it means, if it does mean anything. And I just want to explain how really, even if Biden does not manage to achieve this climate bill, so hopefully Manchin and Bernie Sanders and everyone else is going to agree on this bill, that Manchin and Joe Manchin, Chuck Schumer, have I got the name right, are working on together. They are working on it, just the two of them. Then they're going to bring it to the rest of the Democrat Party, and then they hopefully are going to pass it into legislation starting in July, maybe finish the process after the August break. So we may well have the climate legislation by starting in July, and the news about it. And it's very quiet for now because they don't want a lot of publicity. So they are free to work it out without journalists speculating or not. But suppose that he doesn't manage to pass it then if he gets a couple of extra seats in the midterms, then the next reconciliation packages, which you can maybe do 1, 2 next year, in theory they can do 3 a year, but it's two major ones, and the third one something to do, I can't remember the three different ways of doing reconciliation in next year, and then he's have the year after that. And so if he gets an extra seats in the midterms and he retains the House, then he'd be able to do some more stronger climate legislation next year. It just depends on how the midterms go. But even suppose that he doesn't pass it now, that would be a big embarrassment for the Democrats when it comes to COP27. That is why I think it's very unlikely that they're not going to pass something, because Joe Manchin is still a Democrat. He will not want Biden to go to the COP27 in November without a climate bill. That would be extremely embarrassing for the United States, and also quite bad for the midterm elections. So that's why I personally think they're probably going to have a climate bill passed by the end of July, in one form or another. But suppose they don't, then it's not a big deal in terms of the world as a whole. It's a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of a degree. The United States temperature emissions are going down, China's emissions are going up. They are the key. They are about double the United States. There's a whole lot of other countries. The United States is just quite a small fraction compared to the world as a whole. That's just a dip due to COVID. So China is one of the keys. The others, most of them have actually got declining emissions now. So it's mainly not going down because of China and a little bit India. So if those two can both just plateau and the others reducing, then we'll have a peak quite soon. And then if those start going down, then we'll have it going down significantly quite soon, because it's already going down in lots of other countries. And then the United States is going down. And then with the extra executive orders by Biden, will be making it go down a little bit faster. And the infrastructure bill, there's a little bit in there that is going to help. And then there's the progress of technology, which is making everything so much cheaper, so it's much easier to pay for electric cars. Cars are beginning to become more competitive with the internal combustion, and then the solar power is becoming much lower cost, and the wind power, and this is continuing, I expect it to halve in cost again. We're not quite sure when. We've got the first electric planes coming, the various technological short distance, short hop electric planes are coming. They're on their way. There's some already flying experimentally, and short distance. I'm not sure if they're any in commercial use yet. There's lots of things happening technologically. So this, and the electric cars are increasing. Sales are increasing exponentially. The exponentials start very slow, and then it's probably theoretically a logistic curve, where it's going to go up and exponential, almost exponential. They're going to flatten out at 100%, That's all close to 100%. So there's lots going on. And then in the United States, we've got 5 states which have, the ones in blue there, which have already got executive orders or legislation. Maryland has got legislation, the rest have got executive orders for zero emissions by 2045. 2045 for Maryland, that's already in legislation. California, partly in legislation. They have, don't have the 2045 figure in legislation. They have some legislation about electric cars, some legislation about electricity. They have a whole tranche of several bills that have passed through the Senate in one go, and it just needs to pass the House. That's going through right now. If that does pass, then the governor will of course sign them all off. He's very pro-action on climate change, and so then they will have very strong legislation which is almost most of the things they need for zero emissions by 2045. But they're already doing a huge amount. So we've really got California, which is like the 5th or 6th largest economy if it was a separate country in the entire world. It's a very big economy, and that has got a zero emissions target by 2045. So that's quite significant. And then the rest of the United States, then some of them don't have very much by way of target, but the Biden bill will make a big difference there when it comes in. But in terms of total global emissions, you talk about a fraction of a degree. There are 7 Republican climate senators in the Climate Solutions Caucus. There are quite a few Republican climate change representatives in the House, and the young Republicans are very keen on climate change, quite a lot of them, similar to the young everywhere. So this is not a stable situation, this idea that the Republican being a party that is against, it's the only right-wing government in the world that wanted to leave the Paris Agreement. Bolsonaro considered it but then gave up on the idea, and none of the other right-wing countries in the entire world has even considered leaving the Paris Agreement. So the United States is quite an unusual situation there, and I think that's going to change. It's already got signs of changing, and then with the young growing up, and then the next election, even if we got a Republican president in 2024, I'm not sure that he would be able to succeed on running on a platform of leaving the Paris Agreement. And then you've also got the huge, that the more years that this sort of thing is continuing, then electric cars getting very big, not just Elon Musk and Tesla, all the major car companies are producing electric cars. So this is happening very, very fast in electric trucks and even electric tractors now. And the Department of Defense is working on electric tanks, which is a very big challenge, but they're doing that too. So there's a kind of momentum behind it. And then you get the industries that are producing all these electric cars, and you've got the renewable industry now, very big industry now in the United States, as in most countries. It's not nowhere near as big as the fossil fuels yet, but it's getting there, and it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and with each year it's getting bigger. So by 2024 there's going to be a huge pressure to at least have some support for renewables continuing, and renewables getting lower cost, and they're already competitive with the lowest cost fossil fuels with natural gas, and they're predicted to halve in price again. So I just don't see how it's going to be possible for the United States, maybe if somehow some president, not Trump can't get elected because of January 6th, but if some other Republican president got, like DeSantis or something, got elected in 2024, and then he maybe, on a if that was possible. But if he ran on a platform to withdraw from Paris Agreement, or to tear up all the climate legislation that's been passed by then, he would probably lose because of that. Because there's really lots of vested interests, along with lots of intermediate people who are, people who've been indefinite before they were moving in that direction, and you've got another 2 years, and what's going to happen in 2 years. So I'd be very surprised if but anyway, even if the United States does not do this, and it does, even if it were to level off, and these countries go down, and the other states, some of them even were to start having just completely level and not going down at all, then still that would make a tiny fraction. You're talking about less than a tenth, probably more like 100th of a degree difference by 2050. You're not talking about anything major here. You're not talking about a difference between 1.5 and 2, or even just between 1.5 and 1.6, nothing like that. So please don't be scared about this. It's just hysteria, and these people do not know. They're just people who are reacting emotionally, and journalists who often don't spend an awful lot of time on research for their article. They're not experts themselves, obviously. They ring up a few experts, they find someone who says something dramatic, they write that into their article, and then the article is often really quite misleading. I personally think that we should have fact-checking of especially of articles on climate change, because they make so many mistakes, and sometimes it may be intentional, just being activist. Sometimes it's just that it's techie, and it's quite difficult to get techie things right, especially if you don't have a science background, or don't have a very strong science background, or haven't been following climate change. I've been following climate change since the subject began in the 1970s. So, but many journalists haven't been doing that. Many have only been following it for a couple of years. So, anyway, hopefully that helps you a bit.